In respect to all of the angels that know they are exactly that right now, those that have known what I'm about to say, the actual, since Adam, the line of David, and this message, by the grace of God myself, but the message is obviously that it's always been all of us since Adam. To clarify further, the word, the term, and ultimately the name, originally, Adam, represents us all as human, the humankind, human race, as you see here. In the original Hebrew form, the 3 letters also serve as a clock, as a calendar, marking since Adam to David to the coming of Mashiach, which means the Messiah, the Anointed One. And though this is indeed myself, the reason why this line has been unbroken since Adam and Eve is to also mark and be able to reflect upon the fact that you are also an unbroken line since Adam and Eve right now, by way of God itself, that start, that spark that brought life to everything, including light to the stars themselves, whose cell does not emit light like the stars themselves, ultimately. Who is not from the light. It itself, ultimately. There have been many claims as of late that there was a coronavirus afoot amongst all the sickness that there can be in this world. And it was also said by great teachers that when the real thing comes, it shall cure mental illness.
There's an important word in the Chassidut that Mashiach comes, the first thing that he will do, he will heal all mental illness.
So, I have found someone who has been running around calling people sick in regards to the corona, which each of us truly wear. It's like this Caesar wreath there. So I found this one who has been calling others sick, saying that their minds are fried.
For Rabbi Friedman.
And the way that I found him, the way that I identified him,
a king who fights his own battles,
is as my Goliath.
Wouldn't that be a sight?
As we see that throughout lines of translations which are consistent in regards to the same pictures, such as what I'm about to say next, can be verified from what has been translated from epigraphic experts, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Septuagint, and also from the information left to us from Josephus. That the translation for giant ultimately, what it really resulted in, speaking again ultimately, was from about 6'5" to 7 foot. And here I come across something saying that this one, who has been my Goliath, calling out every sick person, saying that this cannot be proven?
A Thessalonian you're fighting. He's the biggest man I've ever seen. I wouldn't want to fight him.
That's why no one will remember your name.
A small ship boy named David stepped onto the battlefield and challenged an undefeatable Philistine giant. The time had come. God had at long last chosen a Hebrew king.
And a lot more that we will go over. I come across something as I'm looking for his information to make contact as to, hey, I will nip this in the bud very fast, and ultimately it is because of the timing, the place, everything. And ultimately, yes, it is because of God. And when I say that, I mean every single thing that has ever taken place, from the mathematical constants which we find as a scaffolding throughout the universe, to, of course, every single action that has led up to us and this very moment. They say it is Alexander's sword that untied the knot. And of course, as we sweetly sting this serum of truth,
The prophecy is upon us.
as ultimately it is time, by way of God itself, which allows the sword to be pulled from the stone. And it has been said by very wise men that he will come with the sword of his mouth. And of course, not even saying the least, very wise women, as it can be stated that saying wise is an assertion, but of course, when time proves it correctly, as we will be doing and proving here, it's no longer just an assertion, of course, at that point.
Extremely close to my victory.
The truth. And ultimately, they've always asked, what's mightier, the sword or the pen? Now, en route to finding our answer, I came across this. And though the information on it, I'm sure he could verify or deny, there were some things that stuck out to me as interesting outside of the 6'7" that was listed here. And by this listing, I went looking for the one who's been calling out for proof, who's been calling out for someone to prove him incorrect, to heal him, to make him a believer. So of course, knowing the 6'5" to 7' profile of my Goliath, the one who's been acting as if they've been calling out all of my sisters, all of my brothers, waiting for David. I was looking for here someone who truly was looking to be in the lion's den with the lion of Yahuda. And we'll continue here lightly with a form of history repeating itself. That history held in Genesis back to the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, where here we have a parallel of one supposed to be knowing better when it comes to a particular subject, when it comes to a particular matter, and that knowing better is overridden by love itself. Where here, in this example, Aaron has expressed in his sharings that he lives by as a scientist, not stopping the practice of science within their home.
So just as the psychiatrist must leave his profession at the office and not bring it home because it doesn't work, you can't be analyzing each other if you're going to get along. You have to trust. You have to enjoy. You can't be professional about your personal life.
Meaning, of course, within their everyday lives, wherein an innocent moment where his wife is teaching about two snakes that they just received, Aaron calls the markings upon one of the snakes a heart, referencing a designed shape that for many years has been used to represent the heart.
I get the impression that Rabbi Friedman feels as if we could accept the realities of science in the workplace or at university, that we should choose to forget all that and believe in magical, mystical mythology when we get home.
Which, of course, he knows is not scientifically correct. Furthermore, realistically accurate. And though we all, of course, know what Aaron meant, he not only proved Rabbi Friedman correct, and in essence, when it comes to what he was teaching, to what he knew better, repeated the garden scene, the fruit scene of Adam and Eve in the garden. And it is very fitting that the second snake has markings reminiscent of an ox head, that for so long since the Exodus from Egypt was held as the letter A in Hebrew. Though, as we'll go a little further into later, the original Hebrew script is what is mainly renowned today as hieratic. The original Hebrew, the original 22 characters and numbers infused, and then ultimately the separation of those numbers and characters came in time, as ultimately records reflect. And as we will see more of in this sharing, what originated our scripts, our writing, our language, and built those pyramids are far older than what you know of as Egypt, as displayed in the infusion of letters and numbers which can represent mathematical constants, such as in the first verse of creation, and also embedded within the pyramids themselves. But before we see this displayed, we'll address this.
Why are you in such a brain fog? Do you see why I call you fried mind? Have you been smoking that hobbit weed again, Gandalf?
So, naturally, my line of angels, being the origins of the Hashashin, the shinobi, the samurai, that is renowned commonly to have evolved into the ninja. After all of that talk of brain fog, we're going to make a lot of things here very clear in regards to our human history, the history of all of us, the angels. We will see proof that we all indeed are truly from Adam and Eve, where it truly is that our writing and communication stems from. In a few videos now, Aaron has stated that the Bible was written by savages, and we're about to see that he cannot even conduct his life. He cannot even organize or keep track of his day-to-day activities without the blueprint of keeping time outlined in Genesis, and specifically the first verse of creation, which originally was written with 7 words detailing the 7 days of creation, which Aaron likes to take to a literal format which he has no understanding of, as in the Hebrew, the word day can be used not just to signify or to represent a 24-hour day, but to mark an occurrence, such as even still today, someone using the word day in the sense of back in my day, or back in the day, or en mi dia, as reflects across languages and time. Here we see, as plain as day, clear as day, alive. Here we see not only the days on the calendar laid out in a format of 7 days, but down to the detail of the Sabbath being the 7th day, as we see here. Now, though we're going to go deeper, already Aaron mentioning things such as the Bible cannot be used for any applications at all.
No, the Bible isn't relevant at all to any application for any reason.
Already is smashed to smithereens, as of course his whole life is constructed and held in balance by the Genesis records of creation already. Now, though this is a conversation in itself, to say the least, we do touch on it more in the last video that you just saw up, Symphony of Sevens.
In about 4 minutes, I'm going to do something very smart.
So once more, we'll see if we're thinking savage or savant, after realizing that those 7 words detailing the 7 days of creation are broken up into 4 sevens. 7, 7, 7, and 7 to come out to 28 letters. 4 sevens. Now I'll say again, it is a conversation in itself, but these numbers 7 and 4 specifically relate to, of course, creation, with the number 7, of course, representing the completion of a cycle throughout creation, and of course the number 4 specifically relating to time itself.
Space is 3-dimensional, and time is 1 more dimension.
4 specifically relating to time itself.
Remember that time is a 4th dimension,
which is of course infused, intertwined, going on as we have creation. And that fact is so perfectly portrayed within our very DNA, which is intertwined and constantly being coded from 4 nitrogenous bases. And that number 4 ultimately goes for both DNA and RNA. Also keep in mind that our biological clocks that you may be more familiar with, such as the circadian rhythm, are categorized as 4 as well. And just as the number 4 literally defines time, all those who can understand me inherited their sex chromosomes from 4 original of Adam, humankind, from a male and a female. And it was yet Adam and another Eve. Completion of 4 quadrants, a full circle, back to the garden again, literally, when it came down to modern sciences, reflecting ultimately that our genetics aren't so random after all. As the study on genetics began there in the garden with Gregor Mendel, and just as Gregor, it was the great Barbara McClintock who carried on the baton within the symphony of enlightening the sciences, let alone, of course, us all. Whereas, though of course it is also a conversation in itself, but upon this closer look into the genes, it was nothing random that was found. And just as those 4 quadrants being the completion of a circle, very reminiscent, quote, going into bondage for cycles of 400, or just as the original Hebrew alphabet numerically infused, going from A to Z, if you will, from 1 to 400, the last letter in Hebrew having a numerical value of 400, once again genetically 4 representing completion, is observed scientifically within a mathematical overlay studying the genome, where a trait that disappeared for 3 quarters, and then the 4th quarter was the original trait or original state of being of that genome.
The second thing that Mendel documented was that the trait that disappeared reappeared in the next generation in a very regular way. 3/4 of the kernels are red and 1/4 are white.
Uniformity of nature.
These interesting little twin sectors. So what's going on here? What McClintock figured out after much careful analysis is that this chromosome was breaking. The site that was breaking the chromosome had actually moved to a new place. Now, by that time, she had also figured out that DS didn't break chromosomes by itself, but required another gene, which she called the activator gene, and we abbreviate that AC.
Because there is a DNA molecule whose only job is to direct the other molecules and tell them where to go and what to do. There is intelligence. Whether you believe in God or not, there is intelligence.
Uniformity of nature.
If by that you mean either a collection of information or the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills, then I will grant that the universe has demonstrated the ability to acquire these, though it evidently did not always have these, and DNA was obviously not intentionally designed to have this either. Evolution, which has become the foundation of modern biology. You made an hour-long presentation to pretending to overthrow that, which, if you had actually done that, then that would have given you a Nobel Prize and the Templeton Prize. You can't overthrow evolution.
Award. You never mentioned an award.
Now there are some that will see this as being overthrown, such as Aaron just made clear. And there are those that will know that this is a revealing of an embrace that has always been, is right now, and will always be. As here we're looking at the fourth day of creation. And as we stated before, of course, the number 4, a complete representation of time, not only encompassing the seasons, quarters to complete a pie, to complete a circle, but also the base ordinal directions in regards to navigating geographically, completely reflecting order and sequence as stated here, of course in a manner that has been lightly summed up.
God says, on the first day I created light. On the second day I created a heaven. On the third day I created vegetation. On the fourth day, there's a sequence.
We're going to see the details of that sequence, which will further reveal that there is no growth, there is no evolution, physically or otherwise, without the guidance of God on every level and within every depth within it. There is no mistake that the number 4 and the number 7, standing for time and cycles and the ways in which they do, reflect back upon one another within the 4th commandment, which is to observe the Sabbath, to keep track of time, our calendar. Right now, for those that may be looking at this from perhaps Aaron's current point of view, here is where Yahshua lays siege to atheism, and on this 7th round, the walls come falling down. Of course, due to all of the perfect songs, all of the perfect victories of the angels that came before me, and ultimately our God. Now in a moment, we're going to go back and literally crush what Aaron stated directly as we did earlier in this sharing. But to bring back up the fact that 4 quarters completes a circle, or in other words, a ring, of course again encompassing time. Now Aaron currently was chosen to play the part of he who was calling out a champion.
You couldn't win this even if you found a champion to debate it for you.
One man leaves the circle.
Big holy mission.
And in all honesty, though of course I know they're not going to enjoy hearing this, but Aaron and his entire think tank is no match for me. And even though whoever that may be right now may find it hard to believe, but I don't say that in arrogance. I say that to truly point out that there's no match for God ultimately, as we're all here playing the parts that it assigned us, as the Shakespeare quote in other words says. And after we are done here, the acceptance, the acknowledgement of that truth may be the only thing that keeps one that didn't believe, that didn't know, from going absolutely crazy after believing all that they have for as long as they have already. So here in completing this revolution, this full circle, this Eden to Eden, this full circle of the angel, we're going to prove, of course, that the glory is due to God.
What does it take to change the essence of a man? I need time to change.
And as these cycles, these circles, these rings of time have been since Eden, at the moment here we're seeing a completion of at least another quarter, going from 2023 to 2024. It is of course no mistake that on every level that time has come. A break in the fight between light and dark within. As everything is aligned and we do have the direction, as here of course is grounded as it gets, we go more specifically than the term when nature calls and answer this calling from God itself. So without further ado, we are going to revisit some of the remarks made and address them and witness the end of a paradigm, the annihilation of atheism. And though of course, as always, you do have your God-given free will, here is yet and still a case where we find the end in the beginning and the beginning in the end. Truly a full circle, an Eden to Eden, where in this golden age, history, our present reality, and all the measurements of man that we have preserved and built up since that time, all align like the stars themselves, and it has been more crystal clear than ever before. Once more, we'll continue with the statement that was made earlier.
A collection of information, or the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills, then I will grant that the universe has demonstrated the ability to acquire these, though it evidently did not always have these, and DNA was obviously not intentionally designed to have this either.
Code, this is so powerful. In the book of Daniel, it actually says that the Torah is a code and that the code is sealed until the end of time. Here it is.
Daniel chapter 7 verses 23 to 25 talks about a fourth kingdom that's different from others and will take over the whole world.
He's got a huge tablet of stone engraved with the Ten Commandments, but also it was said during that time the Torah was revealed to him. So this is the way we typically think about this. New interpretations of the text now suggest the entire Torah was encoded into a crystalline substance, not necessarily a crystal, but a crystalline substance that fit into the palm of a single hand. And when the Ark of the Covenant is revealed and made public, we will see that is the case.
It is at these edges that one can find the fourth phase of water, or the exclusion zone of Gerald Pollack's research that shows that the cytoplasm is composed of a particular type of intracellular water, structured water.
The entire Torah was encoded into a crystalline substance.
A liquid crystal type of water in the cell that facilitates energy and information transfer. That a layer of ordered water is created around the microtubules was first reported by L.A. Amos in 1979. A strong electric field is also formed around mitochondria, which are aligned around microtubules. So the acoustic Fröhlich condensates vibrate and structure the waterous environment inside the cell. The ordered water in the region of the electric field along the membrane forms a gel-like structure, which allows for a high excitation of intracellular vibrations. This gel region also shows higher pH values and comprises several layers of water molecules so that it can take on macroscopic dimensions. A decrease or loss of membrane potential along the edges changes the water ordering around the microtubules and mitochondria and is indication for a decrease in the energy pumping. Now it is interesting to note that Otto Warburg pointed out that dysfunctional mitochondria will switch to produce energy from fermentation rather than oxidation or proton transfer to the inside of the mitochondria. ATP production by fermentation takes place outside of the mitochondria in the cytoplasm, where the cellular water is no longer structured and pH is acidic. It is very likely that this reversed form of ATP production and cytoplasmic acidity is the cause for cancer. Importantly, however, it has been shown that the water ordering can also be achieved by an electric field of external source. The cellular water and cytoprotein structures and membranes take on properties that are now studied in areas such as mechanobiology and metamaterials, that is, materials with unusual electromagnetic properties. Researchers at the Georgia Institute of Technology, for example, have demonstrated that hydrogel nanoparticles or gel materials such as you find in the cells can be used to form photonic crystals, which can be tuned for telecommunication through the crystalline lattice. If it is possible to guide the photon through the crystalline lattice, it can be used as a photonic computer. I know this is a lot of technical information, but please don't switch off. Rather pause and think about this for a moment. Try to understand and visualize what is going on right now in your own cells. There are highly ordered negentropic processes in each of our cells right now that have the ability to establish long-range communication links across membranes through water bridges and stable waveforms. This is not the chemical action potential of neuron signaling, but a much faster, coherent wave train that employs quantum mechanical characteristics. All the cells are in coherent communication with each other, based on the liquid crystal vibration patterns in the cellular architecture.
Things like water that all belong to the C2b point group, we can learn a lot of things about, for example, their vibrational spectra.
And it is upon this vibrating lattice that the holographic, image-like bioinformation rides. I consider it more than an analogy that we were created in the image of a divine master blueprint.
Thus, the central dogma explains how the four-letter DNA code is, quite literally, turned into flesh and blood.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word became flesh.
The four-letter DNA code is, quite literally, turned into flesh and blood.
Ancient alphabet, bar none, has always from day one had a mysterious number associated with the letters. The study of that code is called gematria. The atomic mass of the elements are the numbers that equate to the mysterious letters in the ancient alphabets.
Dogma explains how the four-letter DNA code is, quite literally, turned into flesh and blood.
The atomic mass of the elements are the numbers that equate to the mysterious letters in the ancient alphabets. What that means is when you look at human DNA, the numbers that equate to those become 1, 5, 6, and 3. Literally reads, literal. God, eternal, within the body. It is in Hebrew and Aramaic and Sanskrit, three of the root languages. If there's an intentionality underlying life itself, it would make tremendous sense to me that whatever is responsible would somehow have left a sign. Why place that signature into something that can crumble over a few thousand years like a temple wall, why not put it in the creation itself?
As we sweetly sting this serum of truth,
The prophecy is upon us.
as ultimately it is time, by way of God itself, which allows the sword to be pulled from the stone.
Entire Torah was encoded into a crystalline substance.
A liquid crystal type of water, I consider it more than an analogy that we were created in the image of a divine master blueprint. Remember that together with the Fröhlich condensate of phonons or microacoustic vibrations, there is also the coherent cellular biophoton field, according to Fritz Popp, that generates laser interference patterns, which are the very basis for the manifestation of quantum holographic processes in the highly ordered milieu of the interior cell. You kind of have two layers of constructive interference patterns, one acoustic, the other electromagnetic, that seem to generate complex holographic images and wave structures that can be maintained for a long time. This can be regarded as a new type of video system encoding DNA in several layers that remain intact across various domains. The DNA here acts both as an antenna or receiver as well as a sender of genetic images, with the image itself not being stored as a molecular chemical text, but as an interference pattern, a quantum hologram of acoustical
Sound will create geometric patterns that you find in nature.
From the electron moving around the nucleus of an atom to distant galaxies, they're all in a state of vibration.
And electromagnetic waves. Gayayev considers the DNA as a soliton, an ultra-stable wave train, traveling along the complete molecular lattice. The molecule as a whole becomes a harmonic quantum oscillator, and as such will be seen to have resonance coupling abilities with all scales of the universe. The observation that the genetic information is not actually stored inside the DNA, but may be simply read by the laser properties of the coherent particle behavior of the biopolymers from a library that is stored somewhere else, is corroborated by a unique discovery of two scientists of Ciba-Geigy, now Novartis, in Basel, Switzerland. Guido Ebner and Heinz Schürch placed seeds of germ cells of different species into an electrostatic field, a DC voltage field, much like we have it naturally in our atmosphere, in a thunderstorm, or as it occurs between membrane dipoles in the cell. Only they created fields of an intensity of up to 10,000 volts. The seeds remained in the electrofield for about 3 days, or sometimes longer, and then were allowed to sprout and grow. The resulting plant or organism displayed a striking phenomenon. Modern-day maize seeds, for example, will develop up to 5 ears in one place, where normally only one cob develops. This is how maize grew in much earlier evolutionary times. Genetic characteristics that had been lost through cultivation or crossbreeding were brought back and were continued into the following generation of the same plant. The same happened to modern-day wood fern, whose spores were treated in the electrostatic field. It reversed its evolutionary history and grew into a different phenotype of a fern that grew millions of years ago, but no longer today. Chemically and genetically, the wood fern was still the same, but its shape and appearance had jumped back in time. How is that possible? Unless the genetic information is stored somewhere else, possibly in the geomagnetic field, or will at least require a coupling with this background field to access the current version of a plant. The eggs of modern rainbow trout were treated in the same field and surprised the researchers again. The fish born from the treated spawn reversed back in time for 150 years to manifest a phenotype of trout that since has become extinct. It has a larger underjaw, different coloring, is much larger in size, and displays a much less domesticated behavior than modern farm trout. It also does not need all the antibiotics that farm fish needs to survive. The current paradigm of genetics cannot explain the phenomenon. Is evolutionary history recorded in and perhaps even controlled from a surrounding field? Could we access different stages of development by fine-tuning the electric field treatment? And if the genetic image exists as a resonance in some kind of vacuum field, first, that the genetic information does not lie only in the individual chromosomes within a nucleus of each cell, but is also fractally distributed and realized by the complete chromosome continuum or quantum field of the whole organism, with each manifestation of the chromosome set being in communication with the oscillating holographic field of all other sets of chromosomes in each cell. You are not just a conglomerate of individual cells, but yourself a standing wave form of acoustic and electromagnetic information that is quite literally recreating, rebuilding itself continually from the vacuum. Furthermore, this chromosome continuum throughout the organism obviously does not only have a spatial extension, intercommunicating throughout the body and even beyond, but also a temporal component, communicating important sequences of information across generations of a species type. It is a lateral and longitudinal space-time quantum holographic process.
To latitude, 80 longitude.
Secondly, the results of the phantom DNA experiment imply and suggest that the code is not only contained in the coding genes, but its enactment also requires the rest of the DNA, the 98%, its non-coding parts, so-called introns or junk, that do not have obvious functions, but that provide the context for the expression of the gene texts in the cell. Of the genetic code published in German in a book on global scaling, I pointed to the work of chaos game representation to visualize the order and pattern of DNA. There is very clear indication that the genetic code DNA is a fractal.
Fractal math helps us describe and model natural phenomena too, to make computer simulations of our circulatory and nervous systems, or natural watersheds, or brain waves, to better understand how all of these work. And fractal patterns can exist even on the molecular level, with really exciting results. A new study has shown that researchers have been able to make and see a fractal out of electrons, specifically a Sierpinski triangle. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to the dimensionality of fractals. Electrons behave differently based on what configuration they're in because of the way their charges pull on each other. They're in one dimension, configured linearly, or in two dimensions, making up a sheet, or in three dimensions in something like a cube. Their interactions with one another and their resulting behavior differs based on these configurations. This team used a scanning tunneling microscope to place carbon monoxide molecules very carefully on a background of copper. The copper allows the electrons in these particles to behave very freely, so the measurements they took of the resulting shape, both spatial and in electronic wave function, showed that when in this shape, the electrons behaved as if they were in 1.58 dimensions, the fractional dimension expected of a Sierpinski triangle. Teeny Sierpinski triangle fractals, just 20 nanometers big.
There's very clear indication that the genetic code DNA is a fractal. The chaos game representation of Joel Jeffrey and other researchers has shown that the sequence of nucleotides in the genome is not random.
How can you have faith in a God that cannot even control creation? How can he lead you to salvation? There is no hope in chaos. Only
universes are going to exist. Every one of them has to have properties. For a thing to exist, it has to have properties. That means that there's going to have to be some laws built into it, or it won't even exist at all.
We do live in a world where there are laws of logic, uniformity of nature, reason, and morality.
Complete chaos. I mean, well, complete chaos in this case would be nothing. You would have a pandemonium such that you wouldn't get an intelligible order out of anything.
Uniformity of nature.
only in order.
The chaos game representation of Joel Jeffrey and other researchers has shown that the sequence of nucleotides in the genome is not random or following the Boltzmann constant, but displays global patterns and long-range correlations that linear perspectives do not show.
That is usually used as events. Time is a series or a map.
It is at these edges that one can find the fourth phase of water, or the exclusion
They know
zone.
it's a secret map that's yet to be figured out, a map to help the quote searchers find their way to dry land, or water's end as it's referred to in this early script.
But this one in particular has to do with water. Water is a symbol of the Torah, and Ma'amed Torah. And the Torah is emet, is truth.
Each one of us in our own way can make sure to dispense this water to everyone. Like Yeshayahu said, everyone who is thirsty, let them go to the water. So we have the water, we have the Torah. So hopefully.
From this monologue, we can see that Gregor is using his knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and astrology to try to decode the riddle on Enola's back, but to no...
We think of time as just one-dimensional line, but even a line can not necessarily be a straight line, it can be a curved line. It can do all kinds of things, a line. So time is actually a map of events.
From this monologue, we can see that Gregor is using his knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and astrology to try to decode the riddle on Enola's back, but to no...
To be able to connect the verses of the Quran the way you connect the stars to locate guidance, to locate directions.
Gregor is using his knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and astrology to try to decode the...
So time is actually a map of events. When did that begin? That map of events began with that's the process of creation.
But for that most cunning witch who steals back your Bible, the book that can thwart creation itself.
Oh, there's a thwarting angel. Of course that angel's Jesus. Yeah, it's Jesus. It's Angel Jesus.
What for him?
Do what I demand. Bring together all three parts, and you shall be him.
Him?
The one begotten Son.
It shall be me.
Let my eyes guide thee.
Page of the Quran, then we need to understand, well, why did he teach him the Torah and the Gospel as well? And the answer is because all three books would still have application.
Bring together all three parts.
Only a king could make this happen.
All three will be living scriptures and find application to those to whom the scriptures were sent. There's only one religion with the Lord God. One God, one truth, one religion. But at the substance it is one religion, but in form they are different communities. So you have a community of people who follow Jesus, same religion. A people who follow Moses, same religion. A people who follow Muhammad, same religion. Allah's blessings be upon them all.
And as we trace this Silk Road back from the web that has been spun through time, we continuously come back to the source, as there is nothing random nor
The Chaos
chaotic.
Game representation of Joel Jeffrey and other researchers has shown that the sequence of nucleotides in the genome is not random.
And that there are four dimensions, but that the fourth dimension is not essentially connected and one with the three spatial dimensions. So actually the way the Arizal himself explains is that the Lamed of the Tzedem, which is equals 30, but it actually is 3. It's still living in a 3D world. But the Mem of the Tzedem is 4. It's a 4D world, which is a God world.
Celebrate life because it came from God and is becoming more like God.
But life is not becoming imaginary, and it didn't come from your imaginary God either.
Now, just as before, there are some points here that we're going to address directly and see if it holds water, if it bears any truth to it, ultimately. And though as we continue to go over this body of truth, that water might start feeling like a lake of fire to those who held to the paradigm that ultimately there is no God. And to quote an angel who ultimately never said you came from monkeys, light is indeed being shed on the origin of man, as brought by this bringer of light,
The war between sons of light and sons of darkness is
just as stated, just as foretold in the book of Obadiah, the house of Jacob, of Jacob, a fire, the house of Joseph, Yosef, a flame. But of course, even on the cellular level, it is now proven via our cells emitting light such as the stars themselves that we are indeed beings of light. Now that today it can be proven that you literally emit more light per volume than the sun itself, it brings a whole lot more clarification and definition to the term, when they ask you where you're from, tell them you are from the light. It is literally by the grace of God, time itself, that continues to reflect and reveal these depths that, like never before, and ultimately shows was the case all along, such as the ancient languages that mathematically were written in code that could be read like formulas, echoing back through time right now in front of us, and ultimately, both phonetically and otherwise, like a map, like a word search, which are points of connection, like landmarks through time, highlighted in ways never before due to time shining more light on a subject, and thus us gaining perspective and literally seeing the light, if you will, like never before. So when you hear talk of looking for a signature, that if there is indeed an artist, a designer, that it would leave a signature somewhere. When we go back to when they ask you where you're from, tell them you are from the light. Now we're able to see that signature of where we're from, that light, like never before. And through the ages, these sayings now come to life vividly right in front of our eyes, written literally in stone, that have survived through song and metaphor with a resonance that has proven to have always had reason, that in time reflects the signature of that artist, of that king author, the composer of this orchestra, of this symphony. As of course with all of the bad that we can all know and recognize so well, it is truly a blessing to be here in this time where it is truly like never before shown that it is the glory of God to etch or entrench certain realities that surfacely may be hidden to you, but it is the honor of queens and kings to seek them out, let alone reveal and share them. These pieces of proof that reflect being made in the image of God are in their own ways self-similar, in that not only are they at root beautiful as they reflect that creation of the designer, that creator, but you being able to behold that reflects back the fact that you are of the consciousness. To see that regardless of anything else's sight, to listen to that regardless of anything else's hearing, to have taste for it regardless of anything else's senses of taste, or the lack thereof, as it reflects being made in the image of God. And through this arc of time, God kept its promises, and through this arc of that covenant, so much of this has come through the promise of a pure language. And just as we are approaching completing another 4 quarters, a full circle, a cycle, an end to end, those of us of the blessing, of the honor, to witness this right now, we'll be seeing further proof of the glory of God, in that this is truly a return from Eden to Eden, and that pure language marking from Eden to Eden, in that, like a cycle of a sound wave, travels from positive pressure to negative pressure back into positive. It's in a way depicting coming out of positive Eden and eventually into a time where it was said the languages were, quote, confused by all the alignments that made that happen at the time. And from there, continuing into what's been held as, of course, a negative time period. And now back into the positive, that Eden to Eden, that full circle, that completion of 4 quarters. That cycle of a sound wave is completely in sync with the holding that God cut the head and the tail off of our history, which is of course direct reflection of the saying, if you don't know where you come from, how can you know where you're going? This full circle, this Eden to Eden, is the realizing of finding the beginning in our end, in our end, in our beginning, as this Eden to Eden is a redemption, which can not only at its roots directly mean to place something back to its original state of being, speaking of this head that is our present, and this tail, which has been our complete human history, is coming end to end. And this pinnacle of communication, or perhaps even more so, understanding of where exactly it is that we are in time, is reminiscent of the milestone of the full circle that was reaching the threshold known as the first text message, the first email ever sent, in essence, the Morse code, in this evolution of the human being, the full circle of the angel, which were 4 words: what hath God wrought? And with all of the darkness or negative that can sometimes be, it is proven not only do we come from the light, are made up of the light as beings of light, but no matter what ups and downs may have happened, we have been traveling at light speed to get to this very point by the grace of God, where we know no matter how many languages there have been and are, they've all been trying to express the exact same things at root and in essence, as placed perfectly in the poem by Shakespeare, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. As we're going to be getting deeper into this, literal further proof of a pure love that made sure that pure language not only reflects itself now, but shows to have always been there, as even by scientific means it is continuously proven that nothing is random nor chaotic. And the extents of the depths of science further proves that it has always been there, magnifying Genesis chapter 1 verses 3 and 4, wherein there have been experiments which have proven that within a vacuum where there was expected to be nothing, light particles emerge. Light divided from darkness is a direct self-similar revelation of Genesis chapter 1 verses 3 and 4, finishing in God divided the light from the darkness. These particles of light, sometimes known as virtual particles, these subatomic particles of light are literally known as mathematical devices which represent the behavior of quantum fields, which is an exact and direct self-similar revelation into our Genesis, where the origins of our writing is infused both letter and in number, and those characters representing mathematical devices in themselves. There are 22 characters, and it is calculated that the total permutations of those letters by modern day computations is the possible amount of stars in the observable universe. This kiss from our Creator, this star crossing, is embroidered far deeper, reflected from the very cells within your body. As you emit light which ranges at frequencies that mirror the numbers within the calculations, the ranges of the total amount of stars in the observable universe. By the grace of God, making all the more clear the bridge of the astrophysical and the biological, as light is shed on the origin of mankind, and proves that it was always correct that when they ask you where you're from, tell them you are from the light, and brings all the more clarity to sayings and songs that have been so solemnly held, such as, "On earth as it is in heaven, as above, so below, the kingdom of God is within you, as within, so without." A signature reflected in the stars and in the cells as, throughout history, knowledge and consciousness has been represented by light. And we have been traveling at light speed since the beginning of our time. And it is of course so perfectly fitting at this point in time that we are approaching coming up upon a quarter, as in Genesis chapter 3 verse 24, "It has been long held that the garden was guarded by an angel with a flaming sword, a sword of light, and through the ages, in preservation of these gems, these treasures of truth, that sword of light, protecting, preserving these words of light, takes the form of a pen, which has preserved and protected these pieces of knowledge and truth, these sparks of light." And now we're able to see direct reflections of those particles of light used as mathematical devices to describe the behavior, or in this case, the history of creation, of formation of quantum fields. We will begin with a glance at the silhouette of the soul by looking further at the connection of the stars sewn into the cells. Earlier we saw how the cells within your body emit light, such as the stars themselves, in communication with the waves, the quantum fields, the universe around them. And when we look at Genesis, we'll see that the 37th word falls upon the 137th letter, that word being light. Now, though we're about to see more depths of these particles of light being used as mathematical devices, here we see that ordinally, or simply put, we observe upon our analysis, now that it's demonstrated that our cells emit and communicate via light, that the order of the letters and words found in Genesis ultimately foreshadows what is now proven in how the light we emit is absorbed by the universe, by the heavens, by the grace of God. Now, once again, the 37th word in Genesis is light. It is the fourth time that the word light appears in Genesis and begins with what is at that point the 137th letter. And at this level, this height, this depth, this point in time, through the power of this perspective, this lens, we see the infusion, the literal star crossing between science and spirituality, ultimately bridging the astrophysical and the biological, the stars and our very bodies, by the grace of God. The 37th word, light. The number 37 is a literal star number. It is the way in which it literally serves as a mathematical device, being a figurate number. And as in time, we have become able to map out and study our genetic code, the number 37 has been found to be a part of the infrastructure and the functions of the genetic code itself, which is displayed in mathematical overlays and symmetries scientifically, as we see how the number 37 correlates to our genetic code, to our cells. And once more, that 37th word, light, begins with the 137th letter. As mathematical constants make up the infrastructure and function throughout the universe, 137 is renowned for being the number which represents the mathematical constant which is responsible for the relationship between the absorption of light and elementary particles. It is renowned through the studies of quantum physics that without that mathematical constant, there would be no structure that formed from the void, as is literally placed in the text of Genesis. 137 is also the symbol, the representation for the Kabbalah, a book which expands on the creation and the inner workings of the universe, as well, of course, as spirituality. the inner workings of God. One of the literal meanings of Kabbalah is to receive, as we see a direct highlight of 137 representing to receive as that mathematical constant, the fine structure constant known as alpha, is responsible for the absorption, the reception of light. Another direct synchronicity between Genesis, our cells, and the 137 fine structure constant, alpha, comes at the binding of Isaac, Yitzhak, where it is held that Abraham is 137 years old, of course a direct match with the 137 constant. Sarah is 127 years old, which is the sum of all the factors of 64, which is the total amount of codons within our genetic code. And Isaac was 37 years old, which is interlinked with the structures and functions of the genetic code, as we saw earlier. Another depth within the cycle, another interval through time, reflecting in multiple ways, being made in the image of God. This self-similar reflection perfectly walks us right back through creation in Genesis, taking us from the void that would not become a structure which is our world today, to, of course, the very star crossing between our very cells and the stars themselves. As here we're about to continue beholding some of the most beautiful, some of the sweetest signatures from our Mother, our Father, who art in heaven, our Creator itself. As here we see this self-similar reflection of being made in the image of God. As we now know, our genetic code is in essence a fractal antenna, and in time it's now revealed that quantum physics, quantum mechanics has a direct relationship with fractals. Fractals, which on a surface level, at a glance, can appear random, and as some may sometimes look at their everyday, may even appear chaotic. However, just as there are times when someone actually has a chance, after enough time, to reflect upon the happenings within their life, they see that things were not so random, were not so chaotic, and that they are indeed exactly whereas they are meant to be in the moment. That reality is a reflection of the self-similar mathematical shapes known as fractals, that though they can be infinitely complex, they are still utilized to understand complex behaviors, complex realities. And since our very genesis, we see this fractal branching, repeating itself over and again, such as in the depth that it applies, there was once a time where it is held that King David, one of the fathers of my line, tasted the fruit before it was ripe. And by the grace of God, now upon this Eden to Eden, all of these fractal branching, these self-similar repeatings that have happened since the tree of knowledge are seen in a light as never before, now that the fruit is ripe. It is held that after the eating of the fruit of knowledge, that the garden was then regulated to thorns and thistles, and that we would eat bread by the sweat of our brow. There are ancient texts that reflect that as this was being held in the circles and cycles from generation to generation, from civilization to civilization, this full circle from Eden to Eden that you and I are experiencing was always both awaited and strived for since Adam and Eve. As again, these truths reflected and preserved from generation to generation through civilization, ancient texts reveal exactly that. As reflected here, O my brilliant mother, the flower withhold not a direct reference at us eating by the sweat of our brow. The garden restore I, a direct reference at the garden being rendered to thorns and thistles. And prior to that last passage, here as we see the shiny ones or the bright ones, the brilliant ones, as it is placed in Genesis, were tending the garden, as these translations reflect. As we see here, the shining ones cleared the ground or felled timber. And now, by the grace of God, we are able to see revelations on how this actually materialized in multiple depths, on multiple levels. These gems of truth further solidifies the signature in the stars, the star crossing, the very kisses from God itself. This ancient tablet ultimately translates into the star plow. As it was said earlier, that through generation, through civilization, this truth has been preserved. Just as with Abraham, through Sumeria, Joseph, through Egypt, and as we are about to see, is the same here in Babylon. Now the first text from the tablet that we were just reading from, that is in sync and in line with Genesis, was a Sumerian tablet. And just as in Egypt, the way that this was preserved in Babylon were with alignments and logic that ultimately, just as you and I here today, in the moment, simply could not be denied, and because of that timing, because of the happenings, can be regarded to as miracles, such as, of course, ultimately, our every breath. But here specifically, such as direct reflections of Joseph in Egypt, in Babylon, Daniel was exalted. And in once again making old things like new, God itself made sure that this information, this link to the stars, this signature from it itself was preserved. As since the tasting of the fruit, in the Garden of Eden, this tending the garden and eating bread by the sweat of our brow, not only took form of the literal depth that we may first think of or assume, but at this depth, at this level, there reflects a promise kept of the one pure language that would allow us to connect to the stars themselves, a revelation of God itself. It is sometimes said that there are no straight lines in nature. And when we look at our star map,
it's a star map,
our map of the stars, we can also see
an invitation.
As it has so long been held that if a parent wanted to just strictly make a cake as quickly and as efficiently as possible, it would do so by themselves. But even though it may take more time and could even be a little bit more messier, it would be a whole lot more inclusive and fulfilling to their child if they were included in baking the cake. And when we utilize our tool gifted to and preserved for us since Eden and connect the stars, not only do we see some of the straight lines in nature, but it also goes as far as to reflect a fundamental building block within geometry, such as this constellation known as triangulum. And being armed with this knowledge brings all the more grounding to the understanding of the scripture that states that there will be a time where they beat their weapons into, in essence, gardening tools, as we see the direct reflection of what exactly that can mean now, matching in that fashion, reflecting in that fashion. It is the glory of God to conceal, to hide, to entrench a thing. It is the honor bestowed upon queens and kings to seek them out, just as this. And as by the love of God we continue to behold remnants of that pure language, and the origins of that language reflect creation itself in infusing arithmetic, geometry, music, harmony, frequency, sound, and astronomy. Those four pillars, again highlighting the number 4 itself, as we are bringing together not just the 3 dimensions of space, but by the grace of God, time itself has come full circle. And within this cycle, we are now able to link the astrophysical and the biological as never before. And in regards to those light particles being used as mathematical devices to describe the behaviors of quantum fields, when we take that star number 37 and place it in a mirror, its reflection 73 is also a star number. The number 37 in a self-similar fashion, fractally fitting inside of 73 in their star formation. And when we times 37 times 73, those two stars function as a portal, as a stargate, as a doorway that takes us to the first verse of creation itself. As 37 times 73 equals 2,701, the letters, both in the characters which is considered modern-day Hebrew, which is a form of Aramaic, which stuck since an exile until light being shed on and in this day and age, of course by the grace of God. In the original Hebrew, the letters, once more, intertwining both characters and numerals. And that first verse of creation equals 2,701. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That 2,701 forms a mathematical device, being the 73rd triangular number. And now we are able to see how literally light particles still overlay, still serve as mathematical devices, as we see a direct reflection, a direct representation of the 6 days of creation within that 2,701 as the 73rd triangular number, as when we look at our star plow, we see that 6 of these right triangles fit within as the infrastructure of the 73rd triangular number of this pyramid. And as the alignments reflected between our pyramids and the stars themselves is renowned, through time it not only continues to be a reminder of our origins, but the complete genius infused therein, as the alignments of what reflects as the results of mathematical alignments, such as the numerical equivalent to the first verse in Genesis, 2,701, the 73rd triangular number, the formation of a pyramid, continue to reveal the genius in our Genesis. As Genesis 1:1 and those 7 words consisting of 28 letters, which is the 7th triangular number that foreshadow the outline of the 7 days of creation, mathematically form the last of the original 7 wonders of the world, and is held to be made by the 7th patriarch since Adam, Enoch. Even further miraculous alignments via letters infused with numbers serving as mathematical devices completely aligns the book of Isaiah chapter 19 verses 19 and 20 with the Great Pyramid itself, as every letter equates out to 5,449, which is ultimately the height in pyramid inches up to the capstone summit of the Great Pyramid. A literal case in point, as this capstone completes all being put in place, or in this moment, closer put, perspective. And though this next saying, this scripture, this holding, this hymn has been taken in ways beyond a scientific meaning, and rightfully so, still, strictly scientifically speaking, this pyramid is a direct reflection of on earth as it is in heaven, being as that it embeds, it houses mathematical and physical constants, which is ultimately the infrastructure, the scaffolding of the universe itself. And even deeper still, representing how we are made in the image of God, the creator of that universe, being absolutely literal, being made in the image of, does constitute and fit a fractal, a self-similar image that fits one within the other, made in the image of. Here we see that the pyramid itself is the beginning of a fractal, and when seen from above, holding true to our star map, you can see the right triangles embedded into the sides of the pyramid. Those 8 sides reflect as a direct representation of the 4 dimensions of space-time, wherein the 8th of 11 is the first of the 4 dimensions of time and space. Being a construct, a representation of time itself. Now, in the formation of percentage, we see 72.727 rounded up becomes 73, the very same star number that times by 37, the number so renowned to the cell itself within our very bodies, equates to the numerical value of the first verse in Genesis, the 73rd triangular number, 2701. Again, the first verse of Genesis. And just as it is proven that the number 37 correlates to fitting within us, within our very cell, within that 73rd triangular number, that figurative shape of a pyramid fits the 37th triangular number, 703, which, as is beheld here, is both a permutation and reflection around the zero of the numbers 73 and 37 themselves. This reflection this immediate reflection also pertains to the placement of prime number of both 37 and 73, being that 37 is the 12th prime number and 73 is the 21st prime number, direct reflections of one another once again. The star crossing of the exclusivity specific to creation itself is all the more revealed when we separate the place number of the thousands, which is the number 2, the hundreds, which is the number 701 of that 2701, the numeric value of the first verse of creation, when we separate that number 2 and add it to 701, it comes out to 703. And remaining in self-similar fashion, 2701 is the only triangle number which center triangle 703 reflects, as we just went over. Now, going back to that pyramid having ultimately 8 sides, and that 8th of 11 being the first of the 4 dimensions of time and space, being masterfully crafted into a physical edifice such as the Great Pyramid, is a reflection in itself of coming full circle, being as that exactly as it is held, the journey that began since the tree of knowledge in order to understand, which is ultimately in order to master, which one of its root meanings truly means to be able to take something complex and to simplify it. And when we ultimately endeavor to take on mastering, simplifying the complexity of our reality, the 3 dimensions of space and our 1 dimension of time, ultimately we come full circle. And as mathematically simplifying 8th of 11, we end up exactly where it is that we started, as ultimately getting back to the pyramid. There is no further simplifying 8th of 11 as the only common factor, the only whole number that divides evenly into both 8 and 11 is the number 1, which 8 divided by 1 is 8, 11 divided by 1 is 11, just as 8 times 1 is 8, 11 times 1, 11, as it correlates to the saying, know thyself, as ultimately trying to simplify it simply results as a reflection, as a full circle after trying to simplify, or in our case, to master, which of course there was no simplifying without 1. There were never any numbers without 1. Ultimately, there was never a journey without 1. Here mathematically representing that which was not derived from anything before it, but everything else is derived from it. Everything else is because of and comes from it. 1 times 1 equals 1. God, ultimately. And now with that further clarification that everything is indeed derived from, comes from it, we are about to gain even further insight to, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, as always is. Now looking back at that 8th of 11, once more, looking at it as a percentage, that 72%, without rounding it, correlates to the 72 names of God, which is in essence a codex of 72 keys based on 216 letters altogether, structured as like the original triple root structure of the Hebrew language. Each quote word is formatted in triads, and it functions very similar to a tool which it is related to, as we will go over in a later sharing, the I Ching. The tables of the 72 names of God, the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, and also the 32 wonderful, mystifying pathways of the Sefer Yetzirah. All three of these tools, these tables, directly reflect the Merkava, which is a chariot, the method of transition between the four worldly dimensions, the 3 dimensions of space, and the 1 dimension of time. These maps, these calculators, these clocks, these calendars of divination reveal just how highly advanced the chariots, which is our very bodies, truly are, aligning our biological clocks as within with all that is without, here perhaps as surfacely apparent as it can possibly get. The lines used within the Yi Jing and the beginnings of the rediscovery of fractal math, using lines in a fractal format just as displayed here.
You take a line and you divide it in half. Take each product of that division and apply that same previous step, and on and on and on into infinity, a recursive pattern.
And what continues to hold true to a recursive pattern are the reflections of these instruments upon one another, which ultimately serve as absolute proof of this full circle of ours by the grace of God, as this Eden to Eden only becomes all the more clear, and this fruit from this tree of life, from this flower of life, is not only ripe, but has been reserved for us all along, gifted to us by the grace of God. And as we go deeper into this sweet inheritance of mine, and for all those that truly merit it, we'll first see how this blueprint has been left as landmarks of timeless beauty throughout the ages. As here we see direct evidence of how our cube is the architectural design to our great pyramids.
Thought which goes into the formulation of the mathematical concepts is later justified by the skill with which these concepts are used. The great mathematician fully, almost ruthlessly, exploits the domain of permissible reasoning and skirts the impermissible. Certainly it is hard to believe that our reasoning power was brought, by Darwin's process of natural selection, to the perfection which it seems to possess. The miracle of the appropriateness of the language of mathematics for the formulation of the laws of physics is a wonderful gift.
And as we breathe in this blessing from Eden to Eden, being at this point in time, having this perspective to be able to look back, let alone with the alignments that make themselves as clear as ever before, we are able to see that God's timing is truly perfect, and marvels of monuments which it ultimately willed to stand the test of time as further testament to that perfect timing, reflects now the calendar of you and I, the calendar of the angel by the grace of God. And as truth continues to be revealed by time, we see here that it has been held that the phenomena of the 7 light triangles upon the equinox represent the 7 days of creation. And just as we have seen earlier, the pyramids around the world correspond to one another, such as like the alignments with the stars, also the bodies of water found beneath the pyramids. These streams, these lakes of water, of liquid, are just as much purposeful as they are beautiful. This characteristic in design is found throughout the world, as we are seeing here. For years, it has been said by many that the inside of the pyramids appear to be the inner workings of a masterful work, the mechanics of a power plant. And we are witnessing proof of exactly that. With the walls of these great pyramids being made up of quartz crystal, when a flow of water passes through these underground tunnels and shafts and cavities, it's capable of producing an electrical current known as physioelectricity. as here we can enjoy seeing this crystal clear water, which is as purposeful, as productive as it is beautiful. And in the exact same fashion, what is renowned as the Pyramid of the Sun contains lakes of liquid mercury, and the walls themselves, which are laced and carefully impregnated with the crystal known as pyrite, which functions as a conductor of electricity. And once more, in infusing beauty with practical purpose, this perfection is renowned within the candlelight, the torchlight, firelight, to give the appearance, the setting of standing under the stars themselves. Very much reminiscent of the pyramid in Saqqara.
And when I shall die, take him and cut him out in little stars, and he will make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be in love with night and pay no worship to the garish sun.
Light steals home my heavy son, and private in his chamber pens himself, shuts up his windows, locks fair daylight out, and makes himself an artificial night.
Readings of these energies have been found around the pyramids of the world, such as the pyramid in what is known as Tikal. Being made of the same electromagnetic conducting material as the pyramids themselves, it is also renowned that the obelisks were used to distribute this energy, such as quote, modern day power lines do today. And just as it was shown earlier, how the numbers align in regards to Enoch being the architect of the pyramids, as well as further evidence in previous sharings, here we see that the calendar which was passed down to Enoch was represented in one of these pyramids, just as the most ancient and what is proven to be the most advanced of knowledge has been embedded throughout the others. As was stated before, the phenomena that takes place at the equinox is held to represent the 7 days of creation. And now here we'll see the parallels, or closer put, the reflection, and how this calendar is represented in this castle, this pyramid.
In the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have numerous documents who are talking about solar calendar, of pre-calculated calendar emerging, commencing in the spring. While the Jewish calendar, known to all of you who are following the Jewish calendar, is starting in the autumn. The current Jewish calendar is starting in the autumn, in the month of Tishrei, while the biblical calendar states explicitly that the calendar starts in the spring. In the book of Exodus 12, we are told that the calendar is commencing in the month of the spring, the first month of the year, where the year is starting as a divine declaration of the beginning of freedom, of the epoch of freedom. It is given up in the time where the story of the departure from Egypt, the exodus from Egypt, then there is a calendar introduced, and it is said, this month, the month of the spring, is the head of the year, or the first of the month. You would always start to count from the first month. Is the presence of a solar calendar, a calendar which the writers ascribe to a mythical ancient past. The people who had authored the book of First Enoch, it's called the Ethiopian Enoch because it was first known to us in the language of Giz, which is an Ethiopian language, Semitic Ethiopian language. In the book of Enoch, chapter 72-82, is telling us in great detail on the calendar of 364 days. In the book of Psalms that had been found in Qumran, entirely different genre, Psalms. In the extra Psalms, those which are not known to us in the Bible, in the Psalm scrolls which is presented in the shrine of the book, in column 27 we are told that David, king of Israel, the one who had been described as wise and as poetically gifted and as a prophet according to this scroll, had authored 364 daily songs for each day of the year. He further had authored 52 sacred songs for every one of the Sabbaths of the years. He further authored 18 special songs for the holidays of the year. Now, in entirely different kind of genre, let's say the book of Jubilees, which is para-biblical because it is retelling the book of Genesis. In the book of Jubilees, we are told that Noah had stayed in the ark 364 days, which are divided equally to 4 seasons of 91 days, commencing in the spring. The same is true for the scroll of priestly watches, which is worked on a calendar of 364 days. The same is true to a letter called Miktzat Maaseh Torah, a few observations on the acts of the Torah. The scroll is commencing with a calendar telling us that the first week of the year starts in the spring, and there are 52 weeks in every year, and in each week a different priestly scroll is serving according to a calendar of 364 days. Now, the centrality of the solar calendar could not be exaggerated in the library of Qumran. As I said, in various different genres, in various different literary modes, the centrality of the calendar is put forward. It was a priestly calendar, divided according to the priestly sevenfold divisions. Because if there was anything sacred to the priestly calendar, it was the following assertion: the covenant between God and his people is based on the following fact. Every 7 day one should not work on a Sabbath. Every 7 holidays of the first 7 months of the year, one must refrain from work according to the biblical law.
This calendar reflected in this castle, this pyramid, is 78 feet tall to the platform summit, just as is parallel to the Merkaba, to our cube, to our chariot, having 78 lines within the infrastructure of it. That Merkaba, our God-given chariot through the 4 dimensions of time and space, ultimately representing the chariot that is our very bodies, which, as can be best observed when looking at a baby's cell, which grows to a power of 2, which in itself completely obliterates the assertion of random, gradual mutations, and highlights the very clockwork that is our very bodies. And through the depths of the encodings of creation itself, our Merkaba, our chariot of these 3 dimensions, along with the infusion of this 4th dimension of time, that which can seem imperceivable on the surface, without time itself coming full circle, and whatever that subject matter is, that makes time itself appear before your eyes, such as can be seen in the growth of a loved one, or perhaps deeper or more surface time being perceived when you look in the mirror. And now we see an alignment when it comes to our reflection in that detail of what it is to be made in the image of God, wherein in emulating the 7 days of creation, we will see that within the structure of frequencies itself, that every 7th key, every 7th note reflects contained within it the embedded progression of growing at a power of 2, a factor of 2, the same exact sequence of a baby's cell. Further fingerprint from the grand orchestrator, God, ultimately, is just as the first 7 scales and all the notes involved therein come out to a reflection of the first verse in Genesis of creation itself, wherein here 7 scales with all the notes contained therein come out to the number 28, as in the first verse in Genesis, 7 words with all the letters contained therein coming out to the number 28, the 7th triangular number, and categorized in specifically as a literal perfect number, all the more in sync with growing at a power of 2. It is the 2nd perfect number, the first being the number 6, such as the first 6 days of creation before the 7th arrest. And as you observe that line of frequency progressing at a power, a factor of 2, when you get to the 7th note, as in the 7 days of creation, you will see both 73 and 37 embedded within that 7th note, just as in 37 times 73 takes us to the first verse in Genesis, foreshadowing the 7 days of creation. And as reflected with our applicable triangular numbers, such as the 73rd triangular number, the numeric equivalent to the first verse in Genesis, 6 of these triangles placed together create one of the most renowned infrastructures regarded as natural creation within our world, the infrastructure of a honeycomb, which every even perfect number also makes the shape of a hexagon. Further encapsulation of the perfection that is creation by the grace of God, such as the mass of the universe being reflected in the mass ultimately inside of a proton. The table of 64, known as the Yi Jing, also is intrinsically infused with the geometric sequence, the progression at a power of 2, that factor of 2, and also its layout of 7 ultimately equates to 28 in the exact same format as found in the scales and ultimately the first verse of Genesis, bringing a whole lot more clarity to how indeed these tables of divination attribute to navigating our Merkabas, our chariots, through this quantum field. Further revelation of God's perfection and the perfect signature, the perfect fingerprint that it embedded into us are the 13 circles that blossom from the quote fruit of life into our Merkaba, our chariot. Those 13 circles are renowned to represent the 13-week cycle to the ultimately 52-week, 364-day year that is the calendar of the angel by the grace of God. The Great Pyramids as well are representations of the Merkaba in multiple ways. The Merkaba blossoming from that flower of life via 13 lines connected.
There are 13 musical intervals.
Those very pyramids and their proportional dimensions literally encapsulate having every single interval within a full octave of music. As well as all 13 colors within the full spectrum, within the full gradient of a rainbow, the reflection of a musical octave of light. That masterful composer, that masterful orchestrator, the masterful artist that is God, further etched its signature of perfection within creation, within us, in a way which is so superbly, so sweetly made evident, made visible, as we follow the sequence of a baby's cell out to 13, adding up as we go. That 13th place of the sequence of a baby's cell equates to the fourth perfect number. And with reaching such heights of being able to behold such beauty and having clarity as to these perspectives, of course, it could be a dampening, a dimming, or along the lines of, as the phrase goes, the kill of a vibe, to now state something that has a negative nature or direction about it. But of course, it being very clear that there is nothing outside of the will of God, and particularly in all the depths that it pertains to, in the wake of all of these alignments of the past, literally aligning in the ways in which they do. But not only has this truth remained constant throughout all of time, but simultaneously this revelation right now shall stand for all of time. So though as many of you may be feeling right now, there really should be no need to weaponize such beauty, as it is so perfect in and of itself. And ultimately, God being true, of course, there would be none that would be able to withstand that weight being, quote, against it. So this is not to, of course, single out any one person or even any single group of people, as once again, this is for all of time. Let alone someone that, just as like most, had their dreams, their aspirations as a child, let alone those dreams, those aspirations, those wishes, those hopes be towards learning, discovering, or even closer put, rediscovering these things that, again, in essence, leave one in awe, these things that we can recognize above all other creations here on earth. Once more, us, the crown jewel of creation, literally being able to thrive and bring to life what is written in regards to, and not only, it is the glory of God to entrench or, quote, hide a thing. It is the honor of queens and kings to be able to seek them out, to behold them. So in essence, being as outside of the individual sparks that happen within our individual lives, that has been happening since the beginning of our history, being that there has never been a revelation and alignment of these facts that reflects in the way in which it does now today, by the grace of God. Since the, quote, confusing of languages, which take into the account the depth of "in the beginning was the Word," since this quote entrenching that hid this or that fact or concealed it in the ways in which it was up until this very moment, all of this being a fact, this is not to place onto the shoulders of any one individual in regards to quote being against this truth. As I have said, this is not a weight to place on the shoulders of just one person, but ultimately this is a fractal of what goes out in general throughout all of time, as of course the truth is like a lion, as is said. It only needs to be let loose and it will defend itself. So this is going to be put in perhaps the lightest way possible in the moment, that in any literally God-given place and time, anyone speaking like this,
that I should challenge you to a debate, but I don't see how I could do that without looking like a bully.
You still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? Perfect organism. Its structural perfection is matched only by its hostility.
You admire it.
I admire its purity.
Greatness. Another very important thing about Solomon is that his name, Shlomo, means consummation, completion, perfection.
Perfect organism.
He's a perfectionist, Shlomo. It also is the same word in Hebrew as peace. That's why the sages interpret the name Shlomo to be Melech Shalom Shelo, a king who possesses peace. And it says that in his time there was only rest, minucha, v'shalom, and peace.
Redemption in Hebrew always means going back to a prior reality. Redemption is never new. It's always a return. So that's just a little bit about the four languages of redemption.
being that fourth dimension, adding to the three of space, that one more dimension being time, the number 4 representing time itself. Like everything else, ultimately, it is no coincidence that the 4th commandment is to remember the Sabbath. Here, that imminent, prominent number 7 that has been for so long used as the representation of completion of a cycle within the keeping of time. And even in just barely skimming the surface when it comes to all of these facts, that when we look back upon them in reflection, we truly see the sparks of perfection, which has always been ultimately without coincidence, and ultimately as unbelievable as it can seem to some, the perfection that truly has always been God's plan to arrive to this very moment, let alone whatever after. And here we have such a dose, such a depth of truth in regards to what may have seemed as the simplest of sayings that may not just be necessarily taken for granted, but simply too obvious, too good to be true, to be actually done in an environment that doesn't befit the acting out of sayings that are in the direction of, quote, being or doing good in places or in times where, quote, not to be taken advantage of is also to be held in balance. However, This revelation has not been for nothing. And yes, indeed, God is perfect, and it will continue to reflect that what is meant by walk in its ways and be perfect is exactly that, actually trying to walk in its ways. And just as masterful as it has been so simply held that God is good, as it forever is the greatest. And despite whatever urges, situations, or those that may be, quote, plotting against such a direction, is of course not unknown to God. Those whom still actually strive to remain upright, and its very perfection, of course, will amplify that. And it is the absolute truth that it will be on earth as it is in heaven, and any that try to form themselves against that, there is no weapon against it that shall prosper. As quite literally, it is only those that strive to walk in its ways that will not only thrive, that will not only reach and tap into the highest, strongest parts of themselves, but it is only them who have a place here in the world which has arrived. This fact is quite literally scientifically proven, and not to in any way, shape, or form overburden anyone whom is truly trying in good faith. But to those whom are not, of course, you go ahead and try to outsmart God. See how that works out for you.
To know that God has an end goal and that
As the placement of the holding of God, in essence, telling Abraham or Ibrahim, walk in its ways and be perfect, is again perfectly placed. As it is scientifically proven that the human genome is degrading, and when decay is projected backwards in time, it reaches perfection around 4000 BC.
The copying of genetic information, fidelity in transcription cannot
This
be
truth
random.
is an anchor of proof itself. Things such as cancers and the diseases and the dysfunctions that to some have become common do not have to be accepted as normal to our race, especially when one of the key factors, and perhaps the most foundational key factor, is in line, and that is keeping the diet of the angel. One of the most immediate and grounded factors that can be used as a pathway, as a portal to get you back to Eden, is the diet outlined in Genesis 1:29, the true fuel, the true diet of you and I, the angels. Parallel, in self-similar fashion to the Sefer Yetzirah, in where it is held that our literally almighty God created the universe using 22 letters and the numbers 1 through 10, are the 22 pairs of chromosomes within us, the crown jewel of God's creation. And in its profound precision and practicality, those 22 chromosomes plus our pair of chromosome which determines our sex are immediately accompanied by what is known as the mitochondria. The mitochondria breaks down and processes the energy from the foods that we eat and the fluids that we drink so that literally our cells work properly. For so many years, there are those that have had to walk by faith and not by sight, and it is such a blessed honor to be able to display these revelations that have never been before, such as this perfect blueprint which we are about to go over now, in which how to properly fuel our Merkaba, the chariot in which we ride in which we reside within, our literal angel bodies, just as it is held that God created the universe using 22 letters and 10 numbers. Here we see a self-similar overlay in that the 22 chromosomes of our genome, accompanied directly by the mitochondria, which is responsible for fueling our cells, fueling our bodies. Those 22 chromosomes, followed by that mitochondria, is a direct overlay of the 22 letters in which God created the universe, followed up by the encapsulating 10 utterances of creation, in which those 10 utterances directly outline the steps of creation, beginning with Genesis 1:1, and ultimately the 9th utterance, which is speaking of our creation, is immediately followed up with the 10th utterance, being Genesis 1:29, the outlining of the diet of the angel. So to review, directly after the holding of our creation is immediately how to sustain and fuel that creation, which is us, a direct overlay of the 22 chromosomes which make us up, immediately followed by the mitochondria, which is responsible for fueling and powering our bodies. The straying away from both the angel diet and the calendar of the angel is well documented in the Book of Jubilees, chapter 6, which fills in all the more context to the book of Genesis, in particular here, chapter 9, where the capturing of what had happened in the moment could be interpreted in a multitude of ways. Yet in the light of this context in Jubilees, along with all of the alignments which we now know, it sheds further light on where it is that we came from and what it is to return back to this Eden. Eating of the original meats and food within what is outlined in Genesis 1:29 has been proven to prevent and correct, indeed reverse, these illnesses, these plagues. We will go further into this original diet of the angel, and let alone just how delicious these original meats are in a future sharing. One of the most renowned sources of protein and nutrients when it comes to those whom are vegan serves as literal proof of one of the happenings in Exodus being true, which we will go over momentarily. Within the realm of vegetarian, it may not be so commonly known that though in the moment cow's milk is acidic, raw goat's milk is actually alkaline, as well as honey, which can be used topically for a wound, is also alkaline forming once ingested. And though ultimately there is no tradition which is older than the original, and at the same time, as we're seeing here, there is none more rejuvenating at the same time. And though definitions today may be as they are in regards to being vegetarian, eating eggs in this case is just the same as eating any other meat.
The child will never eat the blood.
And just surfacely skimming over some of these points that are, of course, a conversation in themselves, but protein from the secondhand meat from animals ultimately is recycled. Our merkabas, our chariots, our bodies working as precise machines have parts which are acidic, such as within the stomach, and parts which are alkaline, such as the blood. And along with all else which is going on within our very bodies, you can imagine the huge draw of energy it takes to regulate all of these things which can seem seamless to us at times in the moment. In line with the mitochondria directly following our chromosomes within our DNA is the root of the diseases that a lot of us face today, as the mitochondria powers the cell and thus all of the processes, including the instructions of those very cells. So it being clear today that these diseases develop due to instructions in the DNA getting, quote, mixed up, or due to, quote, random misfires, random mistakes in replication of our DNA, which is constantly regenerating itself, constantly reproducing itself. It is clear as ever before that it is what the mitochondria is pulling from, the food that you eat, that ultimately lead to these, quote, mistakes in replications and regenerations not being so random after all, as when that fuel is properly placed, the DNA will not mix up any of the instructions, which literally, the way things have been for quite a while, it's a miracle in itself how some of our bodies have performed, let alone have lasted, with some of what we have put our bodies through. So, in essence, as sensitive of a subject that the foods that we eat can be, let alone, of course, those that may have been eating the way that they are their entire lives, whether you are needing to combat a physical illness or looking to enhance physical performance, let alone have any chance of forming this crystalline lattice.
Entire Torah was encoded into a crystalline substance, not necessarily
of reaching this fourth kingdom.
Fourth phase of water, or type of intracellular water, structured water, a liquid crystal type of water in the cell that facilitates energy and information transfer.
Then the direction is before you now.
This connects with the Bible. It talks about a fourth kingdom that's different from others and will take over the whole world.
Sure this sweet machine's not going to waste.
Are you challenging me?
Another superbly sweet signature that sews together both the extents of science and the spellbinding since creation is the fact that the mathematical equivalent to the first verse of creation, the first verse in Genesis, is 2,701. When you add the number 37, the number which is so prominently connected to our DNA, it comes out to 2,738. The molecular weight of all 20 amino acids. One of the most renowned sources of protein that comes directly from a plant is direct proof of a happening in Exodus, further highlighting the authenticity of the historical record. In the book of Exodus, it is held that water was cleaned and purified by a tree. And though that might sound like something out of a fantasy book or play or movie, it so happens that until this very day, the moringa tree, also known as the miracle tree, which is an edible tree that contains every single essential amino acid for protein needed by the human body, which its leaves and soft stems that are unhardened, as well as the seeds, when left in water at least for overnight to soften, can then be boiled and cooked and then used as you would with beans or chickpeas. But until this very day, that very seed is used to clean and purify drinking water, as we're watching right here.
Purify dirty water with moringa tree seeds. Allow the moringa seed pods to dry naturally on the tree before harvesting them. Pound the seed husks, leaving a whitish kernel. Crush the seed kernels into a powder and shake them in a sieve. Mix the powder with a small quantity of clean water in a small cup. Pour the mixture into a larger bottle and shake vigorously for 30 seconds. Using a sieve or a clean cloth, Add the resulting milky fluid to the water you wish to purify. Stir quickly for 30 seconds, then slowly and regularly for 5 minutes. Leave the water undisturbed for at least an hour. 50 to 150 milligrams of ground moringa seed treats 1 liter of water, depending on how clear the water is. The clean water may be siphoned or poured off the top of the container. Boil the water and it is safe to drink and to cook with. Families can benefit easily and with no cost thanks to the moringa tree.
Now you'll notice that specifically the texts say that God shows a tree, and later translations reflect a piece of wood, and the moringa seed pods, when they are dried out, appear to be a piece of wood, a piece of a tree. In line with this Eden to Eden, it is completely fitting that the moringa tree is renowned as the tree of life, as since the first tasting of any fruit, our journey through this formation of quantum fields of our world has been completely in sync. This synchronization between our bodies, our merkabas, and the 4 dimensions of space and time, this synchronization is literally needed for, quote, intelligence. This orchestrated place and time in the concert of God's creation, this full circle in time, this Eden to Eden, highlights the calendar of the angels, as it is held that Adam, humankind, was made at an age of 20, which marked a point in time where creation was at its full stature, with us, humankind, at our full capacity, our creation being interlinked with this synchronization, this Eden to Eden, this promise of a pure language that in essence is our wisdom, is directly reflective of it being held that at our resurrection we would return to an age of 20. This being the resurrection of this wisdom, this knowledge, this light. And within the depths of the echoes of let there be light is the embedding of wisdom itself within creation. The 2 star numbers, which take us to the first verse in Genesis, 73 and 37, have an numerical equivalent and an ordinal value which equates to the word wisdom. The number 37 proving the embodiment of that very wisdom, as we see today how it overlays our very cell and its interworkings, and ultimately the mastery of its creation. And with everything that may be going on in our lives, some of these diseases commonly known may have been taken as something that just happens with time. However, it has been proven that literally the human genome is degrading at a rate that extinction is projected within thousands of years. And it is the resurrection of wisdom, such as what indeed fuels our cells, what indeed fuels our merkavas, our bodies, that not only optimize efficiency, but also heals deficiencies and ultimately saves this angel race. And as we walk through our God-given world, these quantum fields, these waves, in their forms of literal light, sound, from the earth, and water in the air, the fact that ultimately these signals provide the frequencies and the synchronization of those waves needed for intelligence. And just as it is held that in the beginning was the Word, those 22 letters and the numbers 1 through 10 that ultimately make up everything, including these very waves that we speak of. This promise of a pure language, which is ultimately wisdom, understanding, the clearing of space and time, synchronized with where we are in the moment, that has never been clearer than it is right now, literally purifying the waves around us.
Mashiach coming is a purification of the air and a purification of the inner air.
And in complete self-similarity to Genesis itself, upon this Eden to Eden, once again the moringa tree, known as the tree of life, is renowned to have every essential amino acid needed to create a protein, to come out to all 20. Resurrected wisdom, revelations such as this, serves as like the moringa seed itself in purifying water, as ultimately within the 3 dimensions of space, the 4th dimension of time, known to reveal all things, further shedding light on sayings such as, you live and you learn. When you know better, you should be doing better. And in essence, separating the impurities from our very wisdom. And by the grace of God, though everyone in the entire world has their God-given gifts and talents, it is a grace, a complete honor to be able to share this ancient wisdom which rejuvenates.
Very wise and very young. But what actually defines his function, which is what he's here to do, he's here to give advice and to tell us how to save our lives. To save the lives of the whole world, actually.
As it ultimately is the embedding of wisdom by God, our God-given consciousness, and the alignments of these very waves around us, ultimately aligning in a way that is truly as within, so without, as the embedding of the technology within us, the wisdom within us, truly as within, so without. When that technology is fueled correctly, and those 20 essential amino acids, which literally realigns the clock that you are in sync with everything that is around you, back to perfection, back to a year of 20, which acts as a portal to that promise of a pure language, wherein the wisdom of what you're intaking clears up the messages throughout your entire body, and all the more unclogs that very channel to these very waves around us. And just as all of the elemental solids are found within our Merkava, entering this fourth phase of cellular water structure.
Fourth phase of water is composed of a particular type of intracellular water, structured water, a liquid crystal type of water in the cell,
forming this crystalline lattice.
Look at the structure of each one of these planes. You can see that it's a honeycomb, hexagonal kind of structure. Understanding the fourth phase, I think, is the key to unlock the door to understanding of many, many phenomena.
Tapping into this fourth kingdom.
This connects with the Bible, especially Daniel chapter 7 verses 23 to 25 talks about a fourth kingdom that's different from others and will take over the whole world.
This Jacob's ladder, this stairway to heaven, these cellular crystalline clusters overlay directly being represented by the icosahedron, an elemental solid known since ancient times to represent water and also the number 20. And it is at this point in time where we have reached the depths and the heights, alignments, rediscoveries, and ultimately the resurrection of this body of information, which, by the grace of God, outlines how to drive our Merkavas back to Eden, this time capsule back to that point of optimum, to the genesis of our genetics, of our genome having perfect copy fidelity, our DNA replicating without these mutations, and activating our genes like keys being touched within God's favorite instrument, an atom, humankind, back to a time of full stature, back to an age of 20, this Eden to Eden, reflecting at the very end the fourth phase of our cellular water, the fourth kingdom, and blossoming all the more on earth as it is in heaven. And paralleled within a depth is the term as within, so without, connecting literally, whereas every single elemental solid, also known as the Platonic solids, are found both within the body, as they are throughout Earth and the universe. And just as it is shown with these elements that it is truly as within, so without, it is a reflection of ultimately God being within and nothing being outside of it, as those of us who merit it inherit this fourth phase of water, this fourth kingdom.
What are we waiting for? We're waiting for the revelation of Alt is God. Moses revealed to us that God is Alt. God is all. Means that nothing else except God. It's all naught. But Mashiach, we're waiting for Mashiach to reveal to us that Alt is God, that everything is God.
And in further testament of the perfection instilled within us to be maintained, us the crown jewel of creation, it has been shown that the supercomputer that is our brain is, quote, not too warm or too wet for consciousness to exist as a quantum wave that connects with the rest of the universe. As, again, when these elements within us are maintained within a balance harmonious enough, not only are we at an optimum level to be able to prevent or fight off these, quote, sicknesses or diseases, but it keeps the connection clear into this fourth kingdom. Those quantum fields all around us, those electromagnetic fields, have been for ages represented by the elemental solid, the Platonic solid called the ether. This, also renowned as the God force, was thought by some not to truly exist, and yet again, this ancient knowledge, this ancient holding is proven absolutely true. And in a miraculous parallel to us being unified with the field around us, just as our Merkava, which represents our very bodies, our very chariots, is the outline, the basis, the blueprint to the pyramids themselves, in a wondrous overlay of one another, just as the pyramids produce the power that they can using piezoelectricity, otherwise known as piezoelectricity, with the elements and the mechanics of our very bodies being designed in the way that they are. This very same kind of electric charge is found within our very DNA as well as our bones. And in similar fashion to us, because of the orchestration of the symphony within the pyramids connect and resonate with the external fields which make up our world. And just as our cells communicate at a speed of light, and our very DNA is renowned to resonate with 432 hertz, as we reach this point in the 4 dimensions of space and time, the very coordinates of the Great Pyramid parallel us communicating at light speed amongst these waves, these force fields, these frequencies, as they reflect the speed of light and 432 hertz, one of the frequencies most renowned to resonate with our bodies. And as we enter this 4th kingdom, we see how beautiful, how masterful, how precise the timing of God, that no matter what ups and downs, or how seemingly random anything may seem at a whim, through anybody's eyes or between anyone's ears in regards to their perspective, there is no denying that all have been synced to this perfect clock, this perfect timing which God has placed to be. And being blessed with reigning in this 4th kingdom, I, the line since Adam to David to this very moment, I, Mashiach, Messiah, the actual Jesus Christ, of course, will go further into detail in regards to the little war in this full circle back to Eden that has been taking place here with whatever cowardly agencies of those unfortunate enough to be posed against me, where unfortunately the fools, the cowards whom are against me will be casted out from this heaven between one's ears as they try to spy on your very thoughts, stare at your naked daughters, wives, sisters, mothers, etc. Literally looking through your very eyes as you are having sex with whatever loved ones, let alone whatever else you are doing. Literally trying to vicariously have sex through you with the vest which stimulates every single nerve in their body where you might be feeling a sensation in the moment. Though we will continue furthermore to complete this sharing, it has been held that I, the line of Melchizedek, Metatron, has been given 60 lashes. The 216 letters / numbers that are found in Metatron's cube can be broken up into 18 columns and 12 rows, each equating to 60. It is now completely clear that those 60 lashes correspond to mathematics and time itself. That 60 is found to form a right triangle, which can form a pyramid when 6 of them are arranged together.
Apply the Fibonacci clock to a Pythagoras right-angled 3-4-5 triangle. This is absolutely mind-bending. When I add up the values of the three sides, I get A equals 56, B equals 105, and C equals 119. When I square these values, I get A equals 3136, B equals 11025, and C equals 14161. Incredibly, using the Fibonacci clock to create a right-angled triangle, the sum of A squared plus B squared is equal to C squared.
And as time has come to reveal the gates of this fourth kingdom, we are brought back to the structures resulted from the outline of Metatron's cube. These gospels written in granite, these prophecies held in stone. As we reach this full circle within this cycle in time, as has been held in the poem, The Second Coming.
Somewhere in sands of the desert, the shape of a lion body and the head of a man is moving its slow thighs. The darkness, these centuries of stony sleep, were vexed to a nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born.
And just as the pyramids parallel our very bodies in being capable of physio-electricity to in essence resonate and interact with these electromagnetic fields. One of the main components within the gates of this fourth kingdom is calcite. It is very telling upon this full circle in reaching this part of our journey, getting to this point, this fourth phase of water, and coming full circle to seeing the parallel of the structure which is blueprinted by our Metatron's cube, by our Merkaba. It is very telling that the largest known calcite statue in the world is a sphinx.
The shape of a lion body and the head of a man.
And as we have remnants of the truth of our history throughout space and time, so much of it being beyond the physical, but yet and still it is also the return of this capstone, which highlights this Eden to Eden and all the more depths of God's promises kept, so that it is truly known that when you look in the mirror, you are of an unbroken line since Adam and Eve, just as I am.
Confirmation, baby. Thoth is here.
Yes. He's there, yes. I get goosebumps all over my body.
Oh, I love you so much.
And as unbelievable as attributes such as telepathy have always been, when we're able to look back now, we see how perfectly grounded these signatures of the power of God truly are.
Hashem is going to take the sun out of its shell.
Onto these two surrounding lights. The tzaddik lives in his two surrounding lights.
And in time, the signatures of God become all the more clear to us, just as all the more proof that there is nothing random nor chaotic, no matter how hectic things sometimes can seem to be. Again, you are an unbroken line since Adam and Eve, this very line since Adam, which continued to blossom into the children of Israel, has been renowned to be a highlight that we do indeed all come from Adam and Eve, and of course ultimately all are here by God itself. That very signature is highlighted in the fact that we see a purposeful pattern in the outlay of creation, wherein day 1 was preparation for day 4, day 2 preparation for day 5, day 3 preparation for day 6. Order and sequence, even when things may appear random or chaotic, is further observed with the birth of the 12 tribes of Israel.
The tribes that were born in an order of doubles, of twos. All of the tribes were born in twos. First Reuven, Shimon, then Levi, Yehuda is 2, altogether it's 4. Then come the 2 sons of Bilhah, then the 2 sons of Zilpah, then another 2 sons of Leah, then the 2 sons of Rachel. The model of the birth of the tribes is twos.
And in further highlighting the depths of the connections within creation, once fully formed, the source of the symphony of ourselves is from a base of 4 nucleotides, which code in triplets, in 3s. As our code of communication, the original Hebrew comes from a triple consonantal root, as does our DNA communicate, sends its messages via that triple nucleotide sequence which forms a codon. Those communications in triple form from the base of 4.
Order is the way that the campsites, called the Galim, the flags of the tribes were ordered, and they're reordered. It's a reordering process. They're reordered into 4 triplets. And the whole idea of a camp is that it's all together. It's an army, and the camp is an army. And the army is all operating and functioning together. And the way that it's ordered is in triplets. Each triplet also in time corresponds to the yearly cycle of the 4 seasons. The 4 seasons of the year, that each season has 3 months to it. But this is taking an initial order of the birth of the tribes.
And through the seasons, we see the calibration, the synchronization of ancient holdings, ancient songs and sayings revealed to be reality.
It's 99% disturbing. You just put on the radio, almost any channel, even on Root channel, and you hear static. That's the static of the world. And the first thing that happens when Mashiach comes is that all of the radio channels, it's all a different scene, a different vibration. He says the purpose of the king is to unify the opinions of all of the people of his generation, which is to remove, to nullify all of this static in the air. That is explicitly explained by the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim. That's why the Halacha said, and the Rambam himself passes at the end of the Halacha, that the temple cannot be built without a king. Because a king appears, and then a king fights wars, whether it's physical wars or spiritual wars, but he has some work to do in order to purify all of the nations of the earth, or to be able to come to consensus, and this through the power, but also through the goodness of the king. Because the king is a symbol of power, he's also a symbol of ultimate goodness.
In this world, there will be a king who will be descended from David HaMelech, who will rebuild the Beis HaMikdash and gather the exiles of Yisrael and create a world of peace again.
And in the parsha it talks about a king. So you know that when Mashiach comes, we're going to have a whole different system, of leadership here in Israel. We're going to have a king. It talks about a king. So I want to tell you the story from the book of Shmuel, from the prophets, from the book of Samuel, about the anointing of a very special king called King David. Anyone ever hear of Dovid HaMelech, the author of Tehillim and the ancestor of Mashiach, the descendant of Rus, right?
The ultimate past and the continual ongoing present and the ultimate future. The ultimate future is Mashiach. The soul of Mashiach. The ultimate past is Adam. He's the first soul. He's the beginning. He's the first. The last is Mashiach. Who's the middle soul? So the Arizal says that the middle soul, even though he already lived, but he's still continuously alive. His life is going on, and he represents the present. The 3 souls, the Arizal says, are the initial letters of the word Adam himself, because they're all included within the very first one, Adam. And what does Adam stand for? Adam. It stands for Adam, David, Mashiach. And the present is David, Melech Yisrael, Chai V'Kayim. We're living in that present. But Adam, the very first word, Adam, stands for the beginning of all of history and the middle of all of history. As King David is considered the midpoint of history. And the end is Mashiach. And it's all one soul, that it's the unfolding of one soul. So that is Adam, David, Mashiach. Adam, David, and Mashiach.
Faster than the speed of light to the rock of eternity.
And it is, of course, by the grace of God that these revelations are made clear, and brings all the more clarity to the cycle that is represented in the stone that is held to have 7 eyes. And we continue to see paralleled representations of this until this very day.
Which includes circling the Kaaba 7 times.
And now that we are completing this full circle, it continues to be all the more clear where it is that we are in space and time. And as time, by the grace of God, continues to shine light through the darkness, as we go through the interworkings of these full circles, it's also very telling the parallels of the first 7 digits of pi equaling 137. The mathematical constant essentially responsible for the absorption of light, and 137 within ancient holdings, meaning the reception, to receive the absorption of wisdom. Again, an overlaying connection to receiving a stone with 7 eyes, 7 meaning the completion of a cycle.
In Kabbalah, what is Mashiach? But the light that fills our room right now is the light of Torah Moshe Rabbeinu. But Mashiach comes to reveal a new Torah, a new dimension of the Torah. It's all coming from the Torah, all relates to Torah Moshe, but a dimension which has not yet been revealed at all. So temporarily it's darkness. It's above the light. But ki yitrona or min ha'choshen, that darkness will become or chadash, a new light al Zion Ta'ir.
As by the grace of God, time itself continues to shed light and clarity on what our reality is.
In the end, there can be only one.
Just one, not two. So we hope and we pray and we believe that these two figures can actually be united in one person. That there's a first stage, which is a Mashiach ben Yosef stage, and the second stage is the Mashiach ben David stage. David, when I say Yosef and David, I mean the two Mashiachim. Very important prophecy of Yechezkel by Ezekiel, that is the prophecy of the two sticks. That one stick is the stick of Joseph and the other is the stick of David, and he puts them together and they become one stick. And the ultimate future. The ultimate future is Mashiach. The soul of Mashiach. The ultimate past is Adam. He's the first soul. He's the beginning. He's the first. The last is Mashiach. Who's the middle soul? So the Arizal says that the middle soul, even though he already lived, but he's still continuously alive. His life is going on, and he represents the present. The three souls, the Arizal says, are the initial letters of the word Adam himself, because they're all included within the very first one, Adam. And what does Adam stand for? Adam. It stands for Adam, David, Mashiach. And the present is David, Melech, Yisrael, Chai V'Kayim. We're living in that present. Those three souls, Adam, David, Mashiach, the present moment, which you cannot grasp at all, is David, Melech, Yisrael, Chai V'Kayim, David. And once more, we have beginning, middle, and end, and it all alludes to the secret, to the mystery of time, truth.
And as by the grace of God, time continues to reveal all truth, we see how words that we may use every day have far older origins than many may have thought. And here we have these remnants of truth which truly align our history like never before, such as it being held that written communication came from, quote, the Phoenicians, which did not infuse letters and numbers, and the impeccable intertwining of letters and numbers of the original Hebrew of communication and mathematical formulas, as well as mathematical constants being infused in written communication, is truly proof of where our origins truly hail from, as we are about to display in this example here, as so far the only representation of what we know today as the mathematical expression of pi to the accuracy which we have it today is embedded not only in the first verse of creation, but also in the Great Pyramid. No ancient civilization, including that which some for so long had thought built that Great Pyramid, had pi down to such an accuracy. The form of the characters used in this display are that of which took place after an exile, but the representation, of course, remains the same. Now, after seeing simply how pi is embedded into the structure of the Great Pyramid, we're also going to see how it is bound to the first verse of Genesis, and how pi is interwoven, encoded in that very first verse of creation. Now, the smallest whole number approximation of pi is 22 divided by 7. But we are going to once again turn up the power of the microscope, focus in on the resolution, and zoom in deeper than the relation between the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, forming the 7 words of creation that represent the 7 days, 7 phases, 7 occurrences that resulted in forming creation, the universe, the world as we know it. Now, what we're going to do is in the exact same fashion in which we began. We're going to calculate the numeric values of letters used within the first verse. And specifically, we're going to add together the beginning letter to each of the 7 words in the first verse of Genesis. Now, starting with the first letter of the first word, bet, which equals 2. First letter of the second word, also bait, which equals 2. First letter of the third word, aleph, which equals 1. Then of the fourth word, again aleph, equaling 1. Then of the fifth word, hey, which equals 5. Then the first letter of the sixth word, vav, equals 6. And then the first letter of the seventh word, again hey, which equals 5. So the total sum of the initial letters of each of the 7 words is 22. 22, the sum of the initial letters of the first 7 words. And also, in other words, 22 divided by 7 is the average value of the initial letters. 22 divided by 7 the smallest whole number approximation for pi. Now, to even further complete the connection between pi and the first verse in Genesis, we are first going to add up the numeric value for every letter in the word Torah, which in Hebrew is the Bible, can also mean teaching, guidance, direction, or law. Here we're adding together the numeric values of Tav, 400, Vav, 6, Resh, 200, and He, 5. So the complete gematria for the word Torah is 611. So now we're about to see how the numeric value for the Torah, 611, which is in essence a way of saying, expressing Torah in the language of pure mathematics. So now, how that 611 and the total numeric value of the first verse in Genesis, that 2,701, are tied into pi. It has been computed that in the mathematical constant known as pi 3.14, the number 3 standing for so many things, such as a start, a process, and a completion, wherein here we are speaking of the first verse of Genesis, the verse of creation. And after the decimal point in pi, if we add together the 611 digits after the decimal point, it has been calculated that that amount comes out to 2,701, directly reflective of the total numeric value of the first verse in Genesis. And in further reinforcing the connection of pi in the first verse in Genesis, when we take the number of the letters times the product of the letters, which is the sum of numerals times together, and divide that by the number of the words times the product of the words, we also come out to pi, to at least 4 places after the decimal point. Here we have the sum of timesing 28, as in the 28 letters, by each of their numeric values. And counting that out to 4 decimal places comes out to 6.6886. And now timesing the 7 words times each of their total numeric values comes out to 2.1290. And as we divide those sums, as you're seeing here, it takes the shape of pi out to 4 decimal places. And though we will be delving even deeper into factual relations and connections, take a moment to situate the fact that we just clearly saw how a mathematical constant is directly related, intertwined, and embedded with both an ancient physical structure and an ancient language, which again, all 3 drawing connections to one another. And as time continues to reveal all truth, this wisdom, this light continues to connect in all the ways that it does. It's literally fitting that within the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid, that the sarcophagi aligns 5 horizontally and 6 vertically to come out to 137 being able to fit within that king's chamber. The connections of 137 is interwoven all the more deeply as chlorophyll, responsible for the absorption of light within plants, has 137 atoms, which overlays the formation of the 137 atoms found within our very blood virtually exactly. And as has so long been foretold in so many ways, as these alignments continue due to the 4th dimension of time aligning with the 3 dimensions of space, just as time has shined light like never before on how to erect the temple, which is our very body, in entering this 4th kingdom, that 4th dimension of time, synchronizing with the 3 of space, as it is continuously revealed that there is nothing outside of God. That signature etched within the fact that the scepter shall never depart from Judah, Yahudah, the 4th son of Israel, Yisrael. Among all else, me literally being son of Joseph, me literally being the line of David, now mark the time to also erect the 3rd temple by the grace of God.